This is an overview of your first individual project. We'll be going step by step, and if you have any questions, let me know. We begin with a project definition document, and in this case, our purpose is that it's our turn to host the interdepartmental meeting. We have some basic goals and objectives. So 30 copies. I usually do a few extra when I'm printing something. That way in case coffee spills or someone brings someone extra or something like that, I'm covered. So in this case, I'm going to do 30 copies of the agenda, the training materials, and the newsletter. I'm going to order coffee and cookies. I'm going to reserve the conference room with a computer and with the projector in place. I'm going to reserve parking for 10 participants, and I'm going to clean up and set up the room. I'm going to set success criteria that the supervisor indicates the event went well. With project context, for this assignment, you're having to come up with this information on your own. The idea is, how does this specific project tie into other things that are going on with the organization, or what is the bigger picture beyond just this event or whatever it is you're working on? So in this case, it's our department's turn to run the meeting, but I want to make sure that we don't do the same thing that has been done in the last few meetings. I want ours to be special. So the team another department did Star Wars, another one did writing sales objectives, another one did time management. Okay, so we know that we want something other than that. Then, since the meeting is October 28th, and that's just the date I set randomly, you might have a different date for yours. I noticed that it's National Chocolate Day. So how much fun if we had chocolate chip cookies as the cookies for the event? And then I would leave a note for my supervisor letting her know that we're doing chocolate chip cookies because it's National Chocolate Day, and it gives her something humorous and a nice little icebreaker for the event. And then as far as the training, well, customers have complained about lack of follow-up, so training will focus on ways to connect with customers after the sale. So you're just picking something at random. Now, if this were a real project, you would tie it into the actual things that are going on in the company. For project dependencies, remember, these are the items that could affect the results and success of your project. You're depending on them to go well for success in your project. So you're depending upon your supervisor to develop training materials, for your interns to show up and for them to be able to contact you if there's questions. And at the hospital, that might not go well because you don't always have great connectivity. Parking spaces, you have to make sure that they are available so that people aren't driving all around trying to find a place to park. You have to make sure that you're able to book a conference room that's large enough for everybody to fit on the 28th. And then you have to be able to verify that catering is able to deliver the desired items. So those are your dependencies. You're depending upon those things to happen so that your project can succeed. Then you separate things out with in scope and out of scope. In scope are items that you're responsible for. Out of scope are things that are out of your control or that you're not responsible for taking care of. In this case, you're going to reserve the parking spaces, the conference room, you're going to copy the handouts, you're going to supervise interns. There's others you could put in there, but it gives you the idea. Out of scope, well, you're not responsible for developing the training materials and you're not responsible for baking cookies. You might have a couple of other items in there. The one that I'm looking for, though, is that it's not your responsibility to develop the training materials. Assumptions are things that you can assume. So you're going to assume that your interns do a great job. You're going to assume that catering items are taken care of. And you're going to assume that your supervisor gets everything developed that's needed. And you're going to assume that the computer and projector will work properly. Those are the things that you're assuming will go well. Constraints are things that need to be taken into consideration. So the fact that your budget is $200 is something that you need to take into consideration. You also need to take into consideration that you will not be at the meeting due to your daughter's surgery. With risks are things that could happen. Yes, you could have a tornado. Yes, you could have an earthquake, or Yellowstone could erupt, but they're not likely. You're going to do 2 or 3 likely items so that if your project participants have something happen, they know how to address those likely or possible items. It's quite possible that the computer or projector don't work correctly. In that case, you want them to call IT, and there's the phone number. It's possible that catering may not be delivered, or maybe they're wandering around a building looking for the right room. Hard to say. But you want their phone number so that the interns can call and they know what to do. And then what happens with the risk of the intern or interns not showing up? So you would have all materials ready for the supervisor and include contact information for IT and catering in the instruction packet should there be an issue. Stakeholders, primary, supervisor, you and your 2 interns. Remember, the primary are the ones that need to have sign-off and approval so that they understand their role in the project. Secondary are those that are affected by the project, but that don't have decision-making power. So those attending the meeting don't get to decide when it starts or stops or what's being offered, etc. Your recommended project approach, that's not always included, especially if you have a supervisor that gives you very detailed instructions. Because I wanted to put something in here so that you'd get an idea of what could go in, I put in 3 dates were explored, so maybe the supervisor said Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday of the last week in October, and not the 28th if possible. Or maybe you didn't want it on the 28th because of your daughter's surgery, but you'd put in the 28th was the only date where a conference room big enough to hold everyone was available. So you'd put in the why you made that decision. And then you have your preliminary costs, $100 for catering, $100 for parking. Right now, remember, they're rough numbers because it's just your project definition document. You haven't made final decisions. Once you have all those pieces in place, you're ready to work on the work breakdown structure. This is your task list. Now, when I do my projects, especially ones that are simple like this one, I usually do my work breakdown structure and project schedule at the same time and bounce around. But this class teaches you the proper steps, and the proper steps are work breakdown structure, then project schedule. So let's take a look. I've divided the tasks into 2 sections. I have before the meeting, and then I have day of meeting. So before the meeting, my list includes contacting building services to reserve the conference room, verifying with IT that there's a computer and projector in the room, ordering catering, contact department chairs for agenda and newsletter items, develop newsletter, develop agenda, and copy the assigned items. Reserve parking spaces, verify catering, and create task list. Now, I did the verify catering later. So what I actually ended up doing was creating this list. You put it off to the side. You come back to it when you have fresh eyes, and you look and make sure that it's complete. Is there anything else that jumps out? And that's when I realized, I need to make sure that there's cups and napkins and stuff there. What if catering brought them? Let's just plan on it that way. So that's was added to the list. And then I'll create a task list for each intern, and all of that is before the meeting. So the day of the meeting, you're going to place handouts at each chair. You're going to verify catering is in place, clean up after meeting, and set up presentation on computer. Once you have your task list in place, you're ready to do your project schedule. I grouped it into tasks that had similar responsibilities. So on October 1st, I'm going to make all the phone calls I need to do. I'm going to call building services, catering, IT, parking, and then I'm either going to call or email, most likely email department chairs, and ask for agenda and newsletter items. So that's all that day. Give them till the 14th to get to me, and then by the 20th I'll have the newsletter, agenda, and training materials done, and a task list ready for each of the interns. Then on the day of the meeting, Intern 1 arrives at 1:15 and leaves at 2, so they have time to set up the agenda, training materials, and newsletter. They can make sure all the catering items are in place, and they set the presentation up on computer in presentation mode. Intern 2 arrives at 2:30, leaves at 3:15. Gives them a chance to help with anything that needs to be done before the meeting concludes, and then allows them time to clean up after the meeting, and it tells them to use the hallway trash can and to remember to shut down the computer. You'll notice I have a lot more detail here than I would put for something for myself, because I want to make sure that there's no questions and that the interns have very clear instructions for what they need to accomplish. Once I have my project schedule in place, I'm ready to move on to the project plan. So let's take a look at that specifically. So here we have the project plan for the interdepartmental meeting. We have the title of the event, the first date of the project, the end of the project, and when the project was submitted for approval. I have table of contents. Remember to include page numbers. Project plan signatures, so people who would need to sign off. It would be up to you whether you want interns to be part of that approval process. In this case, I did because I wanted them to be aware of when they had to arrive, when they had to leave, and if there was any problems with the tasks that they were going to be assigned. Then you start cutting and pasting. So from your project definition document, you put in your purpose of plans, success criteria, goals, objectives, context, dependencies, and you keep going through that way. Items within scope, beyond scope, budget, risk assessment. Then you get to milestones. In this case, from my project schedule, I used major items that I was going to be taking care of. So I'm going to make reservations and ask chairs for support items. Those are the first. I'm going to be developing support materials. That's the 14th. Copying materials, the 20th. And then cleanup setup is the 28th. So who's responsible, what the item is, and the date. So by the end of October 1st, I should be able to check off that reservations and chairs items are completed. By the end of the day on the 14th, I should be able to check off that support materials have been developed. Then I go back to my roles and responsibilities, and you'll notice that the project sponsor and project manager are more generic. It's really up to you as the project manager how detailed you want each area to be. You may want to relist all of the tasks for the manager. In our case, we're just saying all pre-meeting tasks are complete. But I am including a breakdown for the interns because the project plan is the lowercase Bible. It's the guide for what you're doing for your project. If it's not on here, it doesn't count. I want the intern to arrive at 1:15 and leave at 2, the breakdown of what they're responsible for, what the second intern is responsible for, and their time that they're coming in. We're back to copying, assumptions and constraints, getting those into place. Then we have our project management approach. So how are we dealing with changes? In this case, we're not having everyone sign off on the changes. The only one that has to sign off is the project sponsor, so the supervisor. Communication plan, how are you going to communicate? Well, if I'm telling the interns that they can call me if they need help with something, I need to have my phone number, the project manager, and then in case I need to contact them, I want their phone numbers and emails as well. There's no reason to put in this case our project sponsor. They're simply looking at the final results. The final piece is the closing documentation process. It's up to you how you handle that closing documentation, but you do want to be able to reference whether things went well, they didn't go well, what would you do the same, what would you do differently. In this closing documentation process, interns will submit a brief summary of meeting progress, noting any difficulties, and that will become part of this closing documentation notes. The other item that will be done is project manager will meet with project sponsor to discuss project success. That way you're able to determine, did the project meet project sponsor expectations? Then yes, it reached its goal criteria. Is there anything else that the project sponsor would like to include in the project documentation notes? And then that would also be added in this area, and that would be edited after the meeting, after you've had everyone's input. And that's the end. That brings everything to a close. Then the idea being, when it's the next time that you host the interdepartmental meeting, the first place you would look is this closing documentation notes, what went well, what didn't, so that you'd be able to use that as a starting guide for your next project or the next time that you're doing this next iteration. Hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if you have questions.